Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode 67, and today we're going to talk about drafting with bots, how you can abuse data to get better at quick draft, how you can abuse data to figure out what is good in quick draft, and what is specific to the Phyrexia or will be one format in that aspect. But before we go into it, a quick shout out from the sponsor, and the sponsor is mtgazone.com, where I started writing articles. I think that my last article was pretty decent for my standards. I was writing about what does it mean that a color is the best color and how to sort of navigate through the shorthand that content creators use when they say this color is the best, and actually how to look at the best color from slightly different perspectives. Also, I think that interestingly, while doing research for the article, I figured out why one is such a chaotic format. So yeah, go there, check those articles, and if you don't want to read mine, that's also fine. It's fine. It's acceptable. J2S Josh writes banger after banger for the website, so that's useful to visit and read it. And if you're interested in other formats, I very often net deck from MTGA Zone, and with some success. I mean, they basically pushed me through some of the decathlon competitions that I was not so keen on playing by just net decking and getting there. But normally I have a preamble, but today's preamble is slightly different. This podcast will also can be brought by you if you are willing to become my Patreon. So I started a Patreon. I thought that I spend a lot of time on those seminars. Uh, that's basically occupying most of my spare time, and because of that, I thought, I might as well try to get something out of it. And I want to build that amulet titan. I want to buy my wife some swimming accessories because she's very much into sea swimming. So why not collect some money for that purpose? And if you go to patreon.com/Sherkovitz, you can click and choose certain levels of support. And for that, you will get things like supporting me, if you so much please. But there are also more tangible benefits. You will get access to all the slides that I release. So after this presentation, I'm going to go on Patreon. I'm going to put the slides for this seminar, so you can go screen through the slides, which will help you. You can just go through the slides without listening to my rusty voice, and get some conclusions out of that. Or you can listen to the podcast and have those slides at hand and check them out while you do that. Um, at some levels, you will be able to get your questions in the podcast. So I will have like a weekly question segment. That I heard is a very useful thing. And then, if you ask the question, if I select the question to be answered, I will do a couple of slides on that. Some levels of Patreon will have a monthly data jam. So basically, I'm going to be prepping for the episode on the stream that will be available for the patrons, and then you can just like see my process and guide me through it, give suggestions that might go into the episode or not. You will be able also to get card specific analysis. So once per format, if you are at a certain level of the support, you will be able to pick a card, and I will do a couple of slides maybe to try to analyze something special about this card. That will of course come late in the format when we have the draft and game data from 17 lands available as a public data set. But if you're particularly interested in some card, then you can get that kind of analysis done by me. And at the god tier, let's call it, you can have once a month a 30-minute one-on-one with me. If you're that desperate for company, or if you're just interesting to talk data, or if you're interested about talking about anything really, that will be available. So yeah, that's a slight change of how I'm operating as a content creator. I'm looking very much forward to it. And yeah, remember that first, if you're not a patron of 17 lands, I would rather you support them than me. And but if you have any leftovers, I'm quite happy if you feel comfortable enough to support me. That would be awesome. Kiefer, is there a level where you will analyze my user data? That might come in later, but Obviously, there are difficulties for that because I'm reliant on 17 lens to get those kind of personal data, and I don't want to abuse that relation. But there might be some things changing in 17 lens as well. So maybe that will be a very easily accessible feature. And if that will become much more accessible, I'm going to definitely consider it. And yeah, that would be a great one actually, because I have a good pipeline of analyzing those type of data. So yeah, I would be able to do that. But okay, let's go to the actual meat and potatoes of the episode. There we go. So there we go. So I think that the bot draft is different enough from normal draft that it should be treated as a sort of completely different format. And when I'm talking about bots, bots are software trying to draft, and how they work, we don't know exactly, but we can sort of look at what they do and maybe hypothesize based on that. And I think that initially bots had very few personalities, which means that every bot has a certain tendency. Maybe there's like a green drafting bot, maybe there is like a drafting bot, maybe there is like I don't know, specific archetype drafting bot or something. And in the beginning, there was, I think, very few of those, which meant that bot drafts were very, very deterministic as opposed to stochastic. So draft will be stochastic, which means there will be very big random effects on the draft. And because of that, every draft is very different, and you have to find your lane. Drafting the hard way is the response to that stochasticity when you are trying to find a path but you don't know in the beginning what this path can be. And this is especially tricky in formats when color pairs are balanced because their colors are even on power level, and because they're even on power level, finding an open lane is extremely beneficial. And in formats where there is a powerful color combination or one powerful color, it's going to be slightly different because then you have to stay open, of course, but you probably want to lean on certain strategies. So you want to draft with preferences. And in the early bots, at least, you could just force things. So you basically sit down on the draft and in Eldraine in the first couple of weeks when the format was released, and you know that there will be every Merfolk Secret Keeper that is open, you will see it, which means that you will on average have like 2.4 of them. So if you get them early, you can force the deck with Merfolk Secret Keepers and play some kind of a mill strategy. Then later they changed the bots, and um, personalities were different, but still they were very similar. And from then on, you could not, for the love of it, draft a deck with Merfolk Secret Keepers because they were picking it so highly. So you never had more than one, which means that the strategy was not valid and you couldn't play it. And yeah, on the other hand, in that stage, you could basically force mono red. And I think that whenever Eldraine comes back as a draft bot draft format, you could just close your eyes, pick red cards, and you will end up with a good deck. But I think that as the formats developed, bots also were developed, and I noticed, and I don't have like any solid proof on that, but that there are many more personalities right now, which means that the bot draft is still slightly on rails, but you have the capability of finding a lane, and you can actually draft the hard way slightly more. You should still keep in mind that these are just bots, um, and you can abuse them in similar ways because there will be much more deterministic processes. And by deterministic, I mean the drafts will be on average more similar to each other than the drafts with human beings. And that's a very important thing to understand. Isaiah says that Eldraine bot was in later version was mono green. Yeah, you could pick mono green or mono red or mono white, and all of those strategies were pretty decent actually. Um, so bots also differ in many aspects from humans, and we will focus on a couple of those important aspects because some of them are not linked even to the gameplay, but to the greed of WotC, basically. But they are important because the greed of WotC has implications on how draft is operating. Um, and yeah, we'll try to find some of those gaps that you will be able to exploit in the one format. So there are a couple of very bot specific traits, and one of them is rare drafting. Um, bots are programmed to pick any rare basically as a first pick. And that means that there are several things. First of all, common based decks get better. So if a deck exists at the common level, it's going to be way better in bot draft than in human draft. Because, first of all, the non common based decks get slightly worse because you won't get access to multiple rares. But also, it means that synergistic decks that are based on those basic cards from each set are going to be stronger. Um, and then strategies that are relying on bombs tank. So like almost every format has some kind of a multicolor deck that has that counts on I'm going to draft fixing, some removal, maybe some other interaction spells, and um, and in pack three I'm going to get all the bombs that are not fitting to the color of the people next to me. And because of that, I'm going to have a strong deck because I'm ready to absorb all of them, or maybe even in a pack two. And that strategy just will not fly when you're drafting with bots because they pick rares so highly. We're going to see graphs that show you exactly how high they drafted, but you will very rarely see more than three rares in a bot draft. Um, but because they are so high on rares, it means also that some of the uncommons are more available. Because in a human draft, when you open a pack and there is Annex Sentry and let's say the dual land, the fast land, you're almost always going to pick the Annex Sentry, while the bots will just pick the land for no apparent reason. And because they will pick a land, you will get the Annex Sentry as a second pick. So you might get in the early picks of every pack, you might get more of those uncommons if you're lucky that the current ones are open. Um, okay. Another thing that is very specific for bots is that the personalities, I'm pretty sure of it, have a fixed pick order, which means that they will always pick a card X over card Y whenever they are in the same pack. And because of that, the drafts will be sort of similar. We actually don't know um, what they pick in this totality. We don't know if they even draft coherent decks or they just pick cards based on some individual preference of the personality. It might be very well that the bots end up with an unplayable pile because they just pick random cards, and maybe that some personalities will have color preferences, which means that maybe you can pull 23 playables out of it, but we don't know, and we will have to guess. From the data, it does look like they have a very fixed pick order. And if the pick order is fixed, it means that some cards will be consistently open and some cards will be consistently unavailable. And that those are the cards that you should be looking for and figuring out how to abuse those gaps in the bot system. Um, okay. So if you remember last week, if you watched last week, I analyzed this openness of the color pairs. And openness means how many cards with a game in hand win rate of over 56% in each color pair you will, on average, see per pod. And you calculate it based on the alpha of the card, so how late does it go in the pack. And then you calculate how many will be opened on average, and then you take that alpha by how many are opened on average. You can sort of calculate how many of those cards you will see. And there are not big differences between bot drafting in red and Premier Draft in blue. There are some slight differences. So, for example, if we look at white red, these are just commons. I didn't take any uncommons and rares. You will see on average like 35 commons with over 56% win rate. And by the way, this calculation is based on the win rate from the Premier Draft. I will show you the graph that is based on the win rates from the Quick Draft because, of course, they differ. Some colors are better in Quick Draft, some colors are better in Premier Draft. But if we took all the best commons in Quick Draft and in Premier Draft, you will see 35 of them in white red in the Quick Draft and 34 and a half in Premier Draft. So you see, like an average, um, you will see one common extra, which seems like very little actually. This is all about one. Um, Very good observation, Springbok. Bots do hate crawling chorus. We're going to talk about it later. White black, for example, you will see 20.6 commons on average per pod in quick draft and only 18.5 in premier draft. So you see two commons on average more that are good in white black deck, according to the measures from the premier draft. And we have those 5 archetypes that are just basically never open or very rarely open in Dimir, Izzet, Simic, Rakdos, and Golgari. Changes in there are just cosmetic, so there's not much difference. You on average will see like 1, 2, 3 good commons per pack, because those archetypes are bad, so they have very few good commons. Then red green Gruul, 27.7 good commons in Premier Draft, 26.6 in Quick Draft. So you see slightly fewer good Gruul cards when you draft with bots in terms of commons only. And white green Selesnya, but the difference is basically 0.3. That's not the difference. And Azorius, you see one fewer card in Quick Draft. So basically, if we want to summarize it, you have a slight hit on Azorius and Gruul, and you have a slight advantage of Orzhov and Boros, basically. Uh, 3C Open asks, how do you label a common to live in a particular color pair? Manual labeling. I don't understand the question completely. So you mean, how do I know which common is good in a particular color pair? I take the data for each color pair, and then I basically look at the ones that are over 56% win rate only and calculate from ALSA how many of them you will see per pod, because I know that there are 2.4 on average per pod. So I can recalculate ALSA how many of those I will see, of those 2.4 on average. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so there are like small. Yeah, so yeah, Ovinomeister, I look at the win rates that are specific for the color pair. So I don't look at the generic win rate in 17 lands. In 17 lands, you can actually, if you look at the win rate table, you can pick which deck win rates you want to see, and you can select Azorius, for example, and then you see the win rates only for Azorius. Or you can select win rate for Naya if you want to, and you only look at win rates in 3-color decks that are Naya. It's quite a useful feature if you want to see which cards are specific for a given archetype and which cards do way better in a given archetype than anything else, and then draw conclusions out of that. I very often look at those win rates that are color pair specific and analyze them if I want to know what makes the color pair tick. But yeah, in general, Orzhov and Boros are slightly more open. Azorius and Gruul are slightly less open and quick draft, but these are very small differences when you look at them. Yeah, exactly. And I don't do it. Sorry. I see you select commons in an archetype and only look at how many you will see in a pack that will have win rate above 56. Yes. So not in a pack, but in the whole draft. Because draft consists out of 24 packs. If I know the ALSA, so how late does the card go, I will know on average in how many boosters I will see this card. And if I know in how many boosters I will see this card, I can divide the 2.4 by the fraction of number of boosters I see the card in, divided by 24 boosters in the pod, and then I can recalculate how many copies of this card I will see. Yeah, okay, great. That's what you meant. Okay, perfect. Okay. I'm in the wrong window. God. And this is the same thing, but calculated for the win rates from Quick Draft. So this time I took the data from Quick Draft and all the cards that are over 56. I focused on the top 4 archetypes because they are way more important than anything else in this format. And we see Orzhov is way more open in quick draft than in Premier Draft. You will see 27.7 commons that are good for Orzhov in quick draft, and only 23.8 in Premier Draft. So four commons difference. And four cards is an important distinction, because if you see four more cards, maybe two or three of those will make your deck, and then instead of having a deck that has uh, 17 good playables and six rubbish cards, you might have a deck that has 19 good playables and only four bad cards or mediocre cards. And these things make the results of the draft very different, because you will very often lose games when you just drew six of the bad things that you put in your deck, and you can't compete by playing those cards. And if you only have four, well, you will see at least two decent ones and four bad ones if you're very unlucky, and that might change how the game will end up. In terms of Boros, 50 commons open according to the quick draft stats, and 48.7 in Premier Draft. So two more cards, two more commons you see, but the number itself is impressive, which means that you will basically be able to force Boros in almost every draft. Obviously, you have to keep in mind that lots of those cards are combat tricks, for instance, that you don't want multiple copies of, but lots of those cards will be good commons that you want to play anyway. And you will see 50 of them per pod on average, which means that and that's only commons. You will still see some uncommons and rares. It means basically you can force Boros, and that's a very important conclusion from this whole seminar. If you want to take something out, is that, look, if you want to play quick drafts, probably positioning yourself in a position where you are able to draft Boros early on. So maybe start with white cards or start with red cards. And then if the other color is not so open, you can maybe, if you're drafting red, you can pick some green cards and go to Gruul, which is still good. And if you start with white cards, you can pick some black cards and go into Orzhov, or also green and go Selesnya. These are all good color combinations. I think that this is the best strategy. So yeah, I would probably suggest, if you're drafting with bots in this particular format, look for white cards in the first packs and put yourself in position to be white. Or if there's nothing good in white, just go for red and try to stick to red. Tertiary strategy is green, but green is a bit problematic, as you will see hopefully sometime later, because some of the key green commons are less available. But on the other hand, some really, really good green uncommons are more available. So yeah, it's a mixed bag with green. Okay, tiny numbers here, but I looked at the color play frequency, because 17 lens users are naturally good in figuring out what is open. And very often looking at how frequently they play given card combinations will tell you something about what is more open, because lots of 17 lens users draft the hard way, so they look for the open path. And obviously, the paths that are naturally more open will be found more frequently, because, well, if it's there to find, they will find it. Gruul is the most played archetype still. And it's played around 25%, the same as it is played in Premier Draft. So yeah, basically nothing changed there. What changed is the frequency of other decks that are in the top archetypes in terms of win rate. Boros is played roughly 2 percentage points more than it was in Premier Draft, 18.5 versus 16.8. Orzhov is played way more. It's played almost 5 percentage points more, 18.3 versus 13.6. And also Selesnya is played almost 5 percentage points more, 14.2 versus 9.4. So there's a big increase in those decks. And it's even more lopsided in bot draft than it was in the Premier Draft. You basically have, what is it, 36, 60, 75. 75% of the two color decks are in those four color pairs, and 25% are in the remaining six color pairs, which is pretty strong. Notably, Golgari is played slightly more. I don't know what What effect on that is from the fact that Corticals recorded this Golgari episode recently, which, by the way, is really good. Maybe some of it. But there's also a couple of important cards in Golgari that are slightly more open, and maybe that's the reason. But all the other color pairs, so Simic, Azorius, Rakdos, Izzet, and Dimir, are played much less in bot draft than in the traditional draft. So Azorius drops from like almost 9% to 5%. Izzet drops from 7 to 3.3. Dimir drops from 6 to 4. Rakdos from 3.5 to 2.3. So basically every two decks out of every 100 will be in Rakdos, which is very, very little when you think about it. It's so underrepresented. And Simic is dropping from 3.2 to 2.1, so even fewer Simic decks. So clearly, this is a format where you want to be in those four main colors, because not only they are the most drafted, but we're going back to the eye in a second. It's even more lopsided in bot draft than it was in the Premier draft. So yeah, important to note that you really want to be in those Naya colors and potentially in Orzhov, basically. Yeah, so this is the topic that will come back. Mumin says, B and White, see last week's episode. In last week's episode, I speculated that White is the strongest color in this format, even though the numbers suggest that Gruul is the best archetype. But the fact that Gruul is winning so much is mainly because Red was so open, and not because Red is so good. Because you have to distinguish between color being really good or color being really open. It means, and I looked at numbers, and my conclusion was that White is actually objectively a better color, but because it's so overdrafted on Arena, you won't get those good White decks very often, and because of that, it's not performing as well. And when we look at the numbers from here, we see that this slight increase in openness of certain important cards in White color pairs means that White decks are becoming way better, except for Azorius. But that has something to do with how blue is being picked by the bots. But when you look at the color pair win rates, Boros is the most winning archetype in bot draft, 59.4. And in Premier Draft, it's the second best archetype with 57.6. So there is, again, almost 2 percentage points difference in win rate between Quick Draft and Premier Draft. Then second one is actually not even Gruul, it's Selesnya with 58.4. And that's also an increase from 56.4. So again, 2 percentage points increase in win rate in bot draft versus Premier Draft. Gruul is doing exactly the same as it did in Premier Draft at 58.3, but down it drops it to a third most winning archetype. And we still have Orzhov, which also has 1 percentage point increase from 57 to 56. And actually, Golgari is a slight winner in there with a 53.6, which is still not impressive, but it's better than 51.9 that it had in the Premier Draft. Simic is roughly the same, but again, here we have very small sample sizes, so this can be very easily variance. But all the other four other archetypes dropped significantly. Azorius has a 2 percentage point lower win rate from 55 to 53. Rakdos from 53.4 to 51.5. Izzet drops from 52.2 to 49.3. And 49 for 17 land users, that's a really low numbers. So you probably want to avoid it, because if 17 lands users cannot make those the decks win, it might be hard for you, unless you have like some kind of a crazy secret recipe and it works every time because you are focusing on cards that no one else wants. So yeah, always like, if you find success with an archetype, you probably found the recipe. Don't look at the data, follow what you can do. If you're losing continuously with decks and you look at them and they have low win rate, then probably you didn't find the recipe. You are trying to draft wrong colors, and maybe then you should start looking for a solution to your low win rates elsewhere. That's my recipe for doing stuff. But yeah, again, the more impressive that Boros, Selesnya, Gruul, and Orzhov are the highest win rate archetype is that these are also the ones that are drafted the most. So clearly there is something going on in there. And because unlike in the Premier Draft, the other cards that are drafted in your pod um, are not in your you're not going to play against them. You can definitely look at it as a sort of hint onto what you should be drafting. Key for if you want to play Demir, play Demir. I played the Demir deck yesterday in best of one in a quick draft because I tried to play a couple of drafts just to get the feeling of what the bots are doing from play, not only from the data. I drafted a Swede deck, and then I went 1-3. Yeah, it's almost always almost stabilized, but never quite stabilized, and then they just kill you with one shot. Uh, and or I was like short one toxic because I had one of those um, proliferate combo tempo kind of stuff. It was so close, and I see that this deck might work, but it just was always like a turn too late or something. Okay. Anyway, digression. So one thing you can compare between quick and traditional draft is the ALSA. So here I plotted all the commons in the format, and the ones that are on the upper left side of this graph are the ones that are picked earlier in quick draft, uh, and the ones that are on the bottom right part of the graph are the ones that are picked earlier in traditional draft. And you can see there are some cards that are definitely picked earlier by the bots by a lot, because how far the dots are from the central line determines how big the difference is. So there's definitely some cards that are really super hard picked by the bots, and humans don't want to pick them. And there are some cards that maybe to a lesser extent, but there are still some that are picked earlier in the traditional and go later in the bot draft. And I think it's important to look at those cards because knowing which cards are those allows you to get your strategy um, get your strategy of drafting into a right line, because you know, for example, that if you see a particular card, you might want to try to wheel it because bots are not super keen on picking it. Okay, so the colors that are more available in quick draft than in traditional draft are these. I have 15 of them. The biggest winner is the Rustvine Cultivator, the 1/2 green creature that can tap, put an oil counter on itself, and then can tap to remove an oil counter and untap a land. This goes 3 picks later in bot draft, which means if you're drafting anything green, you will have access to the Rustvine Cultivator. It will almost always wheel when you open it, so you don't have to basically worry about picking it early, because you should see every single copy that is open in the draft. Other card, Whisper of the Dross, the 1 mana -1/-1 proliferate trick, removal trick, whatever. So you will also see more of those. That's probably important if you're playing some sort of white-black strategy that wants to get corrupted and maybe can do the first 2 poison damages, but might have an issue with the third one. But you will have, it goes 2.4 picks later. And then we have like a bunch of other cards that I think are pointing towards Orzhov being more open. We have Crawling Chorus, the 1/1. That goes 2 picks later. It means that you will have much higher chances of getting a copy or two of Crawling Chorus if you're drafting white-black. Blightberry Rat, 2.1 picks later. So you will have more copies of that as well. So right now you have a 1-drop toxic creature that goes later, a 2-drop toxic creature that goes later. Offer Immortality, the trick. You will see all the copies that you want of this card. Bots are not interested in drafting it. Duelist of Deep Faith. That's another very important pick. Because that's another good 2-drop for the toxic deck. So you see like a bunch of cards, and Zealot's Conviction also. If you maybe that card is much more playable in this format because you get access to the early toxic creatures, which means that you're more likely to have corrupted, which means that Zealot's Conviction can be slightly better. Then you have a couple of other cards. I think of note, Blazing Crescendo is slightly more available. Generally, bots tend to draft combat tricks slightly lower than the players. Um, Dune Mover also goes slightly later. That's another 2-drop with Toxic, although it's not like a premier kind of Toxic card. And Charge of the Mites and Terramorphic Expanse also go slightly later, so you might have more access to those cards as well. And then the other cards are sort of role players. So yeah. The cards that are less available, and here you will see some sort of trend. First of all, Quicksilver Fisher, that's the 5-mana 4/3 flyer that loots when it ETBs. That card is picked super highly by the bots, so you can't count on them. But maybe that's good because you also don't want to play it probably. So the bots take one for the team by picking it early and not allowing you to make a mistake of playing with that card. One card that definitely has an impact is Testament Bearer. This is picked by 3 picks higher by the bots than by the humans. And that's partially because humans pick it, I think, slightly too late. That card is not bad at all. But it probably means also that the bots are overvaluing it. Vivisurgeon's Insight. That's another card that is a casualty of the bots. They pick it super highly, so you can't count on the copies of that. And that's actually important for some decks that might want to have a copy or two. 3C Open, quick draft play against quick draft. I'm pretty sure. Oil Gorger Troll is another card that is picked 2 picks earlier by the bots than by humans, so you can't count on the oil gorger. This is not such an essential card for the oil red green decks, but it's a useful card to have, and the fact that you're not getting it will have some effect. But when you look at the rest of the list, okay, we have a bunch of tap lands. We have Surgical Bay, Autonomous Surface, and the Draw Spit. These go later. Also good for you because you probably don't want to play too many of them. I think people overplay those cards. And then we have a collection of blue commons. Melville Strider, the 5-mana 5/5 vehicle that comes with an oil counter and can activate itself once. Eye of Malcator, which I think is an important card for some of the artifact decks. Glistening Seer, the 0/3 that scries. These cards all go roughly 1.5, 1.7 picks earlier in the bot draft. Meldwood Curator, another blue common, the one that puts an instant or sorcery on the top of your library when it TBs from the graveyard. Yeah, Gitaxian Raptor, that's a very big hit for the blue. That goes 2 picks earlier in quick draft. So blue is losing a lot of power there. And I use the word power very loosely here because blue in general is not such a strong color in this format. And it's been even more hampered by the fact that bots tend to draft the blue cards. So blue is a tough sell in the bot format. I think that you should, to the extent that I normally don't give that advice, but I think you should hard avoid blue, basically. And we have a couple of odd ones that include Tyrannex Atrocity, the 4/4 haster, that the bots also pick higher than humans. Again, I think partially because bots overvalue it, but humans undervalue it. What else is there? Cutthroat Centurion, that's the sacrifice black creature. No one plays it, so I guess that's not a big loss. And Mace Skullbomb, it's also not something that you're going to miss. But basically, the main conclusion from this graph is that blue is heavily overdrafted by the bots compared to its power level and compared to the human drafts. So blue is worse in bot draft than in Premier Draft, even though it was never good in Premier Draft anyway. So this is the graph I made to show you just how much rare drafting do the bots do. This is the ALSA for Premier Draft on this axis. And you can see that rares go somewhere from ALSA of 1 to ALSA of 5, and a couple of really bad rares have an ALSA of like even 6. But bots, basically, apart from 4 rares in the format, never let anything go beyond the pick 2, which means most of those rares are first picked, and maybe some of them are like 50% of the time are first picked and 50% of the times are passed. um, but we will rarely see a rare beyond pick 3. And that means any kind of strategy that relies on getting rares in pack 3 is dead with bots, because bots consistently would draft those rares. Because of course, if WotC would let people draft all the rares, people could, improve their collections, and God forbid they would start playing constructed or something. So yeah, they are rightfully protecting themselves from people having collections. Yeah, it's atrocious, this graph. I mean, not 4 rares with an alpha of over 2, and arguably these rares are atrocious and unplayable, and they are all Fs. If you're wondering, these are all the kind of constructed plans that even WotC didn't have the guts to make the bots first pick them. So yeah, there you go. And still, they're picked highly. They're picked much higher than they are picked in Premier Draft. So not a single card has a lower alpha in Premier Draft than in Quick Draft. All of them have a higher alpha than Quick Draft. So yeah, this also means that if you will see probably like five to maybe 6 rares in your regular draft, you will see 3 to 4 rares in bot draft. Okay. The winners of the quick draft in terms of win rate, and I'm talking about commons here. These are the cards that have the highest increase of the game in hand win rate compared to the Premier Draft. And the biggest winner is Sinew Dancer. And I think that this is not because Sinew Dancer is just so much better in Quick Draft. This is because Sinew Dancer has so much better company. The fact that you can get choruses late, the fact that you get all those good 2 drops, white and black creatures a bit later, means that your chance of getting corrupted in any game is much higher. And I think that this was the biggest problem with Sinew Dancer in the human drafts. White and black were just heavily cut, and because white and black were heavily cut, you very often ended up with a deck that could not reliably activate corrupted, and Sinew Dancer for on face value tapper for 4 mana is just not good enough. So yeah, there's the card that definitely gained. Then you have the strange card, Maze's Mantle, the green aura that gives a creature +2/+2 and hexproof if it says toxic. I don't know exactly why it increased. It's still not great, but I wanted to put it on this graph because it's worth for you to know at least that this card has a slightly increased win rate. It's still below average, I think, but it's around 54% game in hand win rate, which means that the card may be like a 23rd playable or something. And you might actually start considering it because you are more likely to end up in a deck that is heavier on poison. It might be, as Springbok says, also that quick draft players are less likely to play around it. Then we have Volshock Splitter, the 4 mana artifact that gives creature +2/+0, and it has 4 Mirrodin, making a 2/2 and it ETBs. Again, this card is medium, but it has slightly higher win rate. It can be very well due to variance. Then we have Pestilent Siphoner, which is a disappointing card in best of one traditional Premier Draft. But here it actually has a number that makes me think it might be okay. Not great, but okay. Because again, with other support that you are more likely to get, the fact that it is this 1/1, that can deal additional damage and maybe even lead to toxic kills or something. So yeah, that's much better. Hexgold Slash is even better in here than it was in the Premier Draft, and this again I think is because of the chorus or cheap toxic creatures, because it's much more important to deal with them. If you're not playing toxic, you definitely want to be able to deal with those early drops. Toxic creature. That's why I think like the Rustvine Cultivator, the green one too, is important because it does block the chorus. So it gains the value. That's also like Hexagold Slash, 3 percentage point higher win rate than in Premier Draft. Then we have Incisor Glider. the 1/3 that when you have corrupted pumps all the team when you attack. Again, a card that gains a lot from the higher availability of cheap toxic creatures because bots don't pick them so highly. Flensing Raptor, same situation. More cheap toxic creature, Flensing Raptor is much better because you will not have many times when you will just play it as a wind drake. Then Titanic Growth, Leon Lightbringer. That was a bit of a weird one, but I don't know. Maybe I should start playing this card on occasions if I have like a bunch of artifacts, equipment. At least worth exploring. And Basilica Shepherd, which was already a top common in the Premier Draft, and it gains still 2 percentage points in here. So looks like it's much stronger again, because making those 2 mites is much more relevant if opponent will reliably be on like 6 poison or something. Indoctrination Attendant, same thing. Another white card on that list. That's the 3/4 that can bounce something to make a mite. That's also 2 percentage point roughly higher win rate. Whisper of the Dross, another black card for the black and white deck. That's much higher. The -1/-1 proliferation. Complete Devotion, another white card with toxic synergies. Testament Bearer, even though it's unavailable because bots overdrafted, has a slightly higher number. I think it might be due to the Golgari decks being a bit more useful. And Chimney Rabble is still higher win rate than it had in Premier Draft. So card is still good. It still goes late and still does what it says on the tin, smashes face, which is great for crew. So these are the 15 cards with the biggest difference in win rate between Quick Draft and Premier Draft. And quick count: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of the 15 have some sort of toxic synergies. Bunch of them have some sort of toxic prevention, like Hex Gold Slash. And there is a couple of red cards that will be good in the white red. And I think that a couple of cards that will be put in the white red, like Leonid Lightbringer, are slightly higher win rate. Okay. Which are the biggest losers in terms of win rate? In here we have some big numbers. Like Vivisurgeon's Insight has a 5 percentage point lower win rate in Quick Draft than in Premier Draft. Same with Prologue to Phyresis, the 2 mana instant that draws a card and puts a top poison on target on each of your opponents. This also lost. So 2 blue cards with 5 percentage point losses. Then we have Cutthroat Centurion, the sort of 3 mana 2/2, and you can sacrifice a creature once each turn, and it gets +2/+2. And then we have Aspirant's Ascent, Chrome Prowler, Eye of Malcator. These are all blue cards. We go slightly lower. We have Experimental Augury and Glistening Seer, another bunch of blue cards. Surgical Skull Bomb, the blue Skull Bomb. Mercator's Watcher, blue card. So yeah, bunch of blue cards are dropping by 3, 4, 2.5 percentage points in their win rate. So that's what makes me think blue is basically unplayable if you draft with the bot draft. I don't think it's necessarily more aggro. I think it is assertive, but I will, as soon as we have the data from public data sets. So 3C Open is asking, can we sum this up? Quick Draft gets even more aggro than Premier Draft. I think that the game length in 1 is heavily influenced by lopsided matchups. And I will look deep into that data because I really want to understand what's going on in there. I don't have that data yet, but my hypothesis would be that there will be a bunch of the games that 17 lens users win are going to be lightning fast, and the games when 17 lens users lose are going to be actually pretty slow, and there's going to be a big difference between this format and other formats. So yeah, keep that in mind. And we have a couple of other cards that are there. Thirsting Roots, namely the 1 mana fetch a land and proliferate. I guess this is because you probably want to have a streamlined 2 color deck, and then Thirsting Roots is not so great. And then Cruel Grimnark, the 6 mana 5/5 Death Toucher that has a slightly lower win rate by 2.4%. Come on, computer. Allow me to change the slide. Okay. So now we can look at the data for the uncommons, because I told you already, because bots are rare drafters, it means that some uncommons are going to be much more accessible. And I'll pick important ones, or at least interesting ones in here, because not all of them are. But I think Prosthetic Injector going 4 picks later is a key for colorless cards are included in that data. Uh, as seen by Prosthetic Injector, which is the most more available uncommon in the set, you see it 4 picks later. That's a lot. This means this card wheels. You will see all the copies almost of this card that will be open at the table. So if you're in the market for those, and I think you might be, because if Toxic is a more valid strategy, putting this Prosthetic Injector on the 1/1 flyer is speeding up your clock by quite a lot. So interesting card to think about, but also a card that you don't need to pick early. And unlike in human draft, you can actually try to wheel it, and if it wheels, I guess you pick it, and if it doesn't, then well, whatever. Shieldred's Edict, that card is 3 picks, goes 3 picks later in the format. Maybe not a very important card, but has its niche uses. I think that if you have an aggressive poison deck in black and white, you might use this card to pave the way for your early drops. So that's like a nice curve topper when you have 4 mana, so you can play this and then play another creature for 2, for example. We have Reject Imperfection, that's the counter spell. Not doing well in terms of how available it is. 2.3 picks late. Earlier, it is being picked by the later. It's picked by the bots than by humans. I think one of the two, maybe 3 most important cards on this list, Ichor Plate Golem, which it goes 2.3 picks later, which means that maybe some oil strategies based on having this Ichor Plate Golem are going to be stronger in this format, because you have access to many more Ichor Plate Golems on average per pod. So with with the number of with the alpha of Golem, you probably would see like 0.3 copies or maybe 0.4 copies per pod, but in the bot draft, maybe you'll see like 0.67 of that card. Yes. So Springbok is asking, wouldn't Ichor Plate Golem going later make Grew better? Yeah, I'm sure it does make the Grew better, but it also means that other things make it worse, and then the color pair stays more or less at even. Because some cards for Grew go slightly earlier by bots. Another card that is in the wheelable category is Silvok Battle Chair. So if you are into a 6 mana 6/6 with trample, you get a much bigger chance of actually drafting it. Also, Incubation Sac goes way later in this format. That sort of points me to the fact that maybe there is some kind of board stall, more controlling version of red green that is available, that would have I don't know, like some early defense, and then plays a sack, plays a Silver Battle Chair, and then tries to win with the opponent through those big threats. Once the game stabilized, you just take over, because sheer size matters for those cards. Tiver Stand, that's the combat trick. 1x, target creature gets +X/+X, and indestructible and hexproof. So yeah, that card is pretty good, and it goes much later by the bots. So a good reason to maybe look at green, because like 3 of the most important cards that I selected there, Silvok Battle Chair, Incubation Sac, and Tiver Stands, are all green. So it seems that good green uncommons will be more plentiful when you draft with bots. And also you can see more of the Necrogen Rod Priest, which is not strictly green card, but it's a red, green, blue, green, black signpost uncommon for that. Of other cards that I find interesting and abusable, Swooping Lookout, the 1 mana flyer with vigilance, and that's also an artifact creature that is going slightly later by bots, and Atraxa Skitterfang, the 3 mana 2/2 that gives things for removing oil counter, like flying, lifelink, vigilance, whatever. This card is a bit more available, and still, despite this and Swooping Lookout being slightly more open, the Azorius archetype is not coming together with bots. So I guess some key cards will be missing. I think the Malcator's Eye is one of those things that are limited, and because they are limited, the color pair just falls apart in this metagame. Okay. So which uncommons are drafted higher by the bots? On the top of the pile, but not with a super big number, we have Distorted Curiosity. It's picked 2 picks earlier by the bots than by the humans. So you have fewer accessibility to this. I don't know if you always are in the market for a 4/4 flyer for 6 that maybe will draw a card, but probably not, because all the removal deals with that kind of effect. But if you think this is for you, you shouldn't be counting on having them unless you pick them really early, which you probably don't want to do. What do we have further? Watchful Blister Zoa. Noxious Assault, that's the sort of mass pump effect trick in green, where creatures get +2/+2, and when they are blocked this turn, opponent gets a poison counter. So that card is not available in this draft. Oxida Finisher, the Equipment Ogre, the 7/5 with Trample that costs less for each equipment that you have. That card is less available, so you shouldn't be basing your strategies of having it. Charforger is less available, the black and red signpost and common. And this might be the main reason why A, Rakdos is played less, B, it's losing more. I think that people were banking on the power of that single card to make some kind of a pivot into red-black. And because this is not as available as it used to be, the whole archetype is suffering. What else do we have there? Voidwing Hybrid, that's being seen a bit less. The 2/1 Demir creature with Toxic, another blow for the blue. Tamiyo's Immobilizer, that thing also less visible. Unctus Retrofitter, slightly less visible again. So couple of key cards in blue are not available. So yeah, Sag. Okay. In terms of win rate, not pick order, the biggest winners of quick draft in terms of win rate change, Porcelain Zealot. That's the 3 and a white 2/3 that at the beginning of your combat you can give +1/+1 to creature with Toxic. No, +2/+2 to the creature with Toxic, or +1/+1 to any creature. Yeah, that card is winning 3.5 percentage points more than it did or than it does in the Premier Draft. So worth looking around it and picking it. Because again, if you go 1 drop with poison, 2 drop with poison, 3 drop with poison, Porcelain Zealot, pump the biggest thing or the most evasive things with poison that I have, and go for it. I think that, yeah, again, this card blossoms because of the neighborhood changed. Other cards of importance, Resistance Reunited, the +2/+2 trick that gives indestructible to your equipped creature. Um, I mean, I guess this can be attributed to variance, but it also can be attributed to the fact that Boros is the best archetype, and Boros does care about equipment, so maybe people use the Resistant Reunited to save their big creatures, the artifact ones. Vivisection Evangelist, that also has a 3% increase in win rate. That's the the black white signpost uncommon that kills something on ETB if you have if your opponent is corrupted. So yeah, I think that Vivisection Evangelist in the Premier Draft was suffering from people overdrafting black and white and therefore not getting enough early drops. And here, because you can get those early drops, you can get this corrupt online by turn 5. This card becomes markedly better. What else do we have? Necrosquito is the winner of this format. There we go. Ravenous Necrotitan also doing better than the previous thing. Venomous Brutalizer doing better in this than the previous format. That's the 4/4 with Toxic 3. That can proliferate when it EBs if you pay the additional 2 mana. Silvok Battle Chair is overperforming. Obviously, the 6/6 Trampler. So yeah, I mean, judge it as you want, but to me, it does look like toxic related cards are having a hell of a better time in quick draft than in the Premier Draft. Notably, a couple of those cards will appear on this list because they go slightly later, because these are top uncommons and normally people would pick them, but because there's rares to be picked by the bots, this card will travel slightly further around the table, so you can count on getting a couple. Which other viral spawning is doing slightly better, but these are all within 2 percentage points, which means I am not confident to say this is how it is. I think you would need to do proper stats to do that, and I ain't doing it. And the biggest losers in the quick draft, 2 cards that do really, really badly, and that's Distorted Curiosity. The 2 and a blue draw 2 cards. If opponent is corrupted, you don't have to pay the 2 colorless. So for 1 mana, you will get what's the name? A draw 2 card spell. But still, because blue is so overdrafted and because blue is so bad in getting corrupted, this card is doing poorly in the format. And Nahiri's Sacrifice, by the way, Distorted Curiosity dropped by 9.4 percentage points. That's the chasm. And Nahiri's Sacrifice drops by 7.6%. That's the 2 mana sorcery that you can sacrifice a creature and it deals damage equal to its mana value to any number of targets. No big things to sacrifice, and also if you have a big thing, you probably don't want to sacrifice because you'd rather have a big thing that smashes your opponent. We see a big drop by Charge Forger. I told you it's less open, which means that it's a bit of a gamble going into this color pair. And numbers on Charge Forgers sort of suggest that it's not a good idea to play it. Then we have Serum Snare. That's probably because the blue card in blue does very badly. Watchful Blister Zoa, we talked about in the 4/4 flyer for 6 mana, doesn't do well. Didn't impact the board substantially, and probably that's why the win rate is lower in here than in the human draft, because blue is just on general less playable. We have Serum Core Chimera, the red blue signpost that also is losing more in this format. And we have Anctus Retrofitter and Troller Drake and Temios Immobilizer at the end of that table, losing roughly 2.5 to 1.5 percentage points of win rate. And I think that this is a problem for the blue decks. Their best cards, bots value them, and the rest of the cards are just not good. So that's why, yeah, suggest avoiding black, if only slightly. Right, we roll to the end of the discussion. So some conclusions on the bots. White is much more open, and because it's much more open, it wins much more. I still strongly feel white is the best color in this format. Um, I still strongly feel that it is still slightly overdrafted by the bots, even, but it's less drafted than by the humans, which means you have a wider window on how to get um, on the toxic deck and hopefully win through that. Second conclusion: blue is basically unplayable. The fact that the Raptor goes much later, the fact that all the good cards go much later, it just doesn't bode well for this color. I mean, you still can play blue, and I'm sure that there are blue decks that can trophy and quick draft, but they will be fewer far between, and because of that, maybe you want to sort of semi-hard avoid drafting blue. The third conclusion is that strategies based on toxic are markedly better because you get access to those key cards like the chorus a bit more frequently than you did in the Premier Draft. So don't be afraid to play toxic strategies. And I think that my conclusions from the article I wrote before the set was released about toxic still stand. I think that you still need to be aggressive on dealing with the toxic, and you need to know before you start doing anything, you need to know what does my deck kill with toxic damage or face damage, and uses poison only to get corrupted and get bonuses out of that. You need to be able to answer those questions before you build your deck in order to build it in the way that the plan is consistent and cohesive across. Um, uh, Drachtung, yes, these conclusions are only for bot drafts. These are actually stated as opposed to the Premier Draft. So toxic strategies are markedly better compared to the Premier Draft. Blue is basically unplayable compared with the Premier Draft, and white is much more open in relation to Premier Draft. So yeah, these conclusions stay for the bot draft, not necessarily um, for the traditional draft. But yeah, I think that if I were to play those drafts to level up or get some trophies or whatnot, I would start drafting white or red, depending on the strength of the card, and try to stick to those and try to avoid traps of getting like a good blue card and hoping that you can draft it. I would say it's still a trap. The biggest losers of the bot draft are Azorius, Rakdos, Demir, and Izzet. They all lost a hell of a chunk of win rate percentage, and they just look bad. Rakdos is suffering that normally you pivoted through the Charforger into Rakdos, but Charforger goes so early that you probably won't have time to do that kind of pivot, or you will not get enough good playables for that deck. And the last conclusion: Gruul is similar in power level, but it's weaker comparably. So yes, it still wins those 58 percentage points. Um, and God, I lost my plot. It gets the 58 percentage points, but Rakdos gets around 60 now. So Gruul is no longer the thing to be doing in this format. I think Boros is much more open and has higher win rates. So if you want to force anything, I would start looking at Boros and probably start with white. And then if white is not available, maybe red as your first color to be drafting so you can outsmart the bots. Right. This is it. That's all she wrote, as someone says in other podcasts non-related. I would like to thank 17 Lands team for helping me and all of us really with provision of the data. Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wood, Ale Ballini, and our newest addition, Johnny D. WSC. These are the people responsible for building the site and figuring out how the logs operate and lots of other things that go under the bonnet of 17 Lands. So thanks them. For the first time, I can actually thank my two new patrons, Max and Logan. Max is my first patron, and no one can take that away from them. Logan is my second patron, and no one can take that away from them. So yeah, thanks to them, and hopefully thanks to some other next weeks. But yeah, I'm super thrilled to thank these two. Um, then I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown, my trusty editor of the podcast, someone who dedicates their time into making my podcast actually audible, cutting all the pauses and making sure that I'm not doing any dumb stuff. I really, really am grateful. And I'm super stoked that Fake Jake actually qualified for the next Pro Tour. He went to Philadelphia, played in the PTQ and sealed and spiked it. So if that shows you anything, it means that just by editing my podcast, you can qualify for a Pro Tour. Imagine if he listened to it. And I would like to thank my sponsor, mtgazone.com, and I would like to thank SSQ and Mana Junkie, the two people who are responsible for my intro music in the podcast version of it. And with that, see you next week, and hopefully we can talk about either draft data or the speed of the format, which will be super interesting if I get that data. But till then, bye.